Okay, so let's continue with our third and last panel, Afro-American Contemporary Arts. And we have today Adriana Franco, Onyeka Nwelue, and David Hundeyin, but he is not here at the moment. He should be connecting online, but we are going to start, and let's see if he connects. I'm gonna read a bio, and after that you will have around 20 minutes. Okay, gracias. Then you're gonna have around 20 minutes to give your presentation, and once you conclude with your presentations, you all conclude your presentations, then we're going to have a round of a series of questions and concluding remarks. Well, for those who don't know me, I'm Arturo Mendoza, and I work at the Escuela Nacional de Lenguas Lingüística y Traducción here at UNAM. So let me start with Adriana. Adriana Franco is an academic technician of the Latin American Observatory of Geopolitics, OLAG, at the Institute of Economic Research here at UNAM. She's a professor at the Faculty of Political and Social Science here also at UNAM. And she's part of the university program in Asian and African Studies from PUEA and the Mexican Council of International Affairs, COMEXI. She is a member of the National System of Researchers, Level 1, and she has participated in various academic conferences and has written in books and specialized magazines, journals, scholarly journals. So thank you very much for being here today, Adriana, and I will give you the floor. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I want to start saying thanks to the organizers of this colloquium, and also thanks to all the people who are here listening us. And also thanks to the people who are watching the transmission. And well, for me, it's an honor to be here in this space and sharing this space with these colleagues. I'm a bit nervous, but well, I'm also really happy to be here and share some of the ideas with you and with all the colleagues. Well, I'm going to read the things I prepared for today in order to comply with the time. So I'm going to start reading. Thank you very much. Can I change? ¿Yo le puedo cambiar? Oh, the next one, please. When imagining a world within science fiction, I usually think of flying cars, enormous skyscrapers, outer space, humanoid aliens, and robots or artificial intelligence. But in these representations, many things are missing. Where are the trees, animal, mountains, and rivers? Why are robots and aliens almost always humanoid? Why is there rarely any connection to spiritualities? Why do these futures seldom focus on the so-called global south? In the capitalist system, spaces like Africa and the Caribbean have been subordinated to the interest of a few. Do racialized people have a future in this system? The subordination of the global south has been justified by extremely violent narratives, where bodies that do not align with the figure of the modern subject are represented as something anomalous. These people have also been deprived of their knowledge, as argued by Moreno and Amador. Moreover, science, technology, and the design of futures have often been portrayed as opposed to racialized people. However, in this presentation, I want to challenge that notion through the analysis of two stories written by Caribbean authors. But before delving into these stories, I will explain 2 points. Thank you. First, the Caribbean is a place of encounter between Latin America and Africa. Both regions share deep historical and cultural ties, largely because of the transatlantic slave trade. These links have fostered resistance movements shaped by racial domination, as exemplified by the Pan-Africanist and Negritude movements. The Caribbean is a space of hybridity and syncretism, where miscegenation flourishes. These African connections are richly reflected in Caribbean literature. Second, racialized people have been writing science fiction for many years. However, we rarely read these texts. In 1994, Mark Derry, a white American man, coined the term Afrofuturism to describe science fiction addressing African Americans. But even before him, Caribbean writers were already debating whether their work belonged to the universal literature or how it should be named. These authors resisted creating a deterministic race-based category. The connection among their texts was not merely based on the color of their skin, but also on their political, cultural, and historical realities. In the early 21st century, a new current emerged, Afrofuturism 2.0. However, this movement remained anchored to American logics, which render other literary movements invisible. In 2020, Nigerian writer Nnedi Okorafor coined the term African futurism to, in her own words, regain control of how she was being defined. For Okorafor, African futurism is a subcategory of science fiction centered on African cosmologies. Much of what is written in the Caribbean can be connected with both categories. However, it also has its own particularities, marronage, cultural interactions, and the reclamation of identities by the people inhabiting this space of encounter. To explore these specificities and the critiques they offer of capitalism's current phase, I will analyze two stories, A Habit of Waste by Nalo Hopkinson and El Precio de la Inmortalidad by Eric Jorge Mota. Both stories depict dystopian futures that sharply critique capitalist mode of consumption. Nalo Hopkinson is a fiction writer and artist. Born in Jamaica, she lived in Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, the United States, but has spent much of her life in Toronto, Canada. Her extensive body of work blends the unreal and the futuristic with the spiritual traditions like Yoruba and Voodoo. A Habit of Waste appears in her 2001 collection Skinfolk, published by Open Road. The story explores internalized racism and proposes an alternative to the accumulation-driven, wage-based economy. The narrative voice is first person, making the story more intimate. Cynthia, a Black woman living in Canada, hated her body so much that she underwent a procedure to change her appearance. Early in the story, as she rides home from work on a streetcar, a woman boards wearing the body she used to have. Even though she recognizes her old body in this woman, Cynthia despises the way the woman confidently embraces and loves her appearance. Hopkinson uses hyperbole to illustrate this internalized disdain when Cynthia declares she, and I quote, hated the back to African nostalgia shit, end of the quote. This reveals a profound internalized racism. Hopkinson suggests that even in the future, bodies will continue to be classified according to their shape and color. Frantz Fanon argued that racialized people exist in the zone of non-being. For Cynthia, the procedure was an attempt to enter the zone of being. Although racialized populations have tried to escape this marginalization by adopting white cultural norms, under capitalism, they remain unrecognized as fully human. For Cynthia, the only perceived solution was to change her body entirely. Actually, she became a white woman. Cynthia also rejects her parents' accent. Hopkinson employs metonymy to highlight this when Cynthia remarks, and I quote, I wish they dropped the banana boat accents, end of the quote. Despite the story's portrayal of internalized racism, the woman on the streetcar represents resistance. She redefines her body and rejects imposed stereotypes. Furthermore, Cynthia worked at a food bank and had to save for 5 years to afford the body procedure, illustrating how racial domination compounds class oppression. Regarding the story's critique of capitalism, another character deserves mention, Mr. Morris, who was a frequent customer at the food bank and spoke with a Caribbean accent. One day, Cynthia delivered food to his house. And hearing his accent more clearly, she realized he was from Trinidad, like her parents. It was Thanksgiving, and Mr. Morris, alone, invited Cynthia to dinner. She accepted and was captivated by the aroma of the Caribbean food. Yet she wondered how Mr. Morris could afford fresh ingredients, which were very expensive. Mr. Morris, a poor and unemployed elderly man, survived creatively. For instance, he foraged for plants considered ornamental but rich in nutrients. And he explains, and I quote, "I start thinking about how I never could go hungry back home as a small boy. How even if I wasn't home to eat my mother food, I always have some kind of fruit tree or something round place." End of the quote. The visit to Mr. Morris transformed Cynthia's outlook. Although there is much more to explore, I will now turn to El Precio de la Inmortalidad by Eric Jorge Mota. The next one, please. Eric Mota is a Cuban physician and science fiction writer with a wide-ranging body of work that links futuristic themes with spirituality. El Precio de la Inmortalidad appears in Confederación Eléctrica Antillana, Antología de Ciencia Ficción Caribeña, published in 2023 by Elefanta. Unlike Hopkinson's English language story, Mota's tale is written in Spanish and focuses on the length people go to online for followers and the centrality of AI in this dystopian future. The story is narrated in the first person, but shifts to third person at the end to underscore the dramatic conclusion. The protagonist, whose name is never revealed, lives in Havana, which is part of the Earth-Moon system. On Earth, people primarily speak English and Chinese, though English remains dominant in programming and government-run AIs. Meanwhile, on Moon, Spanglish or Spanglish is the prevalent language. The linguistic dimension of Mota's story is particularly significant. The widespread use of Spanglish on the Moon serves as a metonymy for cultural hybridity and displacement. It reflects the author's commentary with the shifting derivation. Okay. The widespread use of Spanglish on the Moon serves as a metonymy for the cultural hybridity and displacement. It reflects the author's commentary on resisting the erasure of localized identities. By juxtaposing Spanglish with English dominance, Mota critiques the cultural imperialism embedded in technological advancement. The protagonist becomes an influencer with the help of an AI named Scarlett. Feminist critiques of technology have questioned why servile AI voices are typically feminine, seeing this as an extension of colonial patriarchal system. Intriguingly, Scarlett not only assists the protagonist, but also makes decisions for him, controlling his actions and life. The author uses irony here to portray the complex human-AI relationship. Through the protagonist's journey, Mota illustrates how life in this dystopia is dominated by technology and social media. Influence determines success, an idea not far from our reality. In the story, as in life, influencers hold power, leading politicians to swap, and I quote, position of power for the opinion of influencers about climate change, fossil fuels, or colonization of the moon. End of the quote. The protagonist becomes famous by performing dangerous stunts like leaping off skyscrapers and making epic landings. After achieving influencer status, he became an idol and then an idoru. Idoru is a Japanese word meaning idol. However, it is a bit different because an idoru was like a kami, an orisha, a semi, like an ancestor, or a god. In this part, Eric shows the religious syncretism of his country, which cannot be understood without the interactions of the spiritualities of different cultures. To become an Idoru could grant him digital immortality. That's why the name of the story. However, this pursuit required ever riskier actions, which ultimately led to his death during a live broadcast. Ironically, this moment of tragedy was precisely what allowed him to achieve the Idoru status he had sought so desperately. And that's also when the narrative voice changed. Mota's narrative explores the dangerous intersection of capitalism, technology, and social media culture. In the story's dystopia reality, the craving for followers mirrors the relentless pursuit of capital accumulation. Social media metrics replace traditional measures of success, and influencers hold more sway than elected officials. The obsession with visibility and influence echoes today's world, where digital presence often outweighs personal well-being. Mota critiques this phenomenon by illustrating how the protagonist becomes alienated from his own desires and is ultimately consumed by the system that promised him glory. Scarlett, the AI, embodies the algorithm logic of contemporary digital platforms. Her control over the protagonist's actions highlights the illusion of autonomy in algorithm-driven environments. Both Hopkinson and Mota's stories challenge mainstream representations of the future. In doing so, they resist the homogenization of science fiction and assert the importance of diverse epistemologies in envisioning possible futures. By centering Caribbean authors, this analysis underscores the region's contribution to speculative fiction and its capacity to interrogate global power dynamics. The Caribbean, as a historical and cultural crossroads, provides fertile ground for narratives that blend resistance, syncretism, and futurism. Hopkinson and Mota exemplify how Caribbean science fiction can critique capitalism, question the role of technology, and reclaim narratives of Black and diasporic futures. In conclusion, these stories challenge dominant narratives by foregrounding racialized experiences and proposing modes of resistance that transcend both technological determinism and capitalist consumption. Through their imaginative landscapes, Hopkinson and Mota not only expand the boundaries of science fiction, but also affirms the enduring relevance of Caribbean, though in global conversation about futurity. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Sorry, I just forgot to say that the topic that you were going to present is Can Diasporas Dream of Utopian Futures, Caribbean Science Fiction, Resistance, and African Links, as you saw. But thank you very much. And now we're going to continue with Onyeka Nwelue. He's going to talk about bridges and barricades on the line to understanding the Afro-Mexican cultures. I'm going to quickly read his bio before I give him the floor. Onyeka Nwelue, a Nigerian scholar, filmmaker, jazz musician, and publisher whose interdisciplinary work spans literature, cinema, and cultural studies. He has authored over 40 books, including The Strangers of Braamfontein, which won the Crime Fiction Lovers Awards and was described by Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka as raunchy. At the age of 18, Nwelue moved to India, where he wrote his debut novel, The Abyssinian Boy, which won the T.M. Aluko Prize for Fiction and the Ibrahim Tahir Prize for First Book in 2009. His contributions to African literature and cultural discourse have earned him 3 nominations for the Future Awards Africa. Nwelue has held several academic positions globally. He was an academic visitor at the University of Oxford, a visiting scholar at the University of Cambridge, a visiting research fellow at Ohio University, and a research associate at the University of Johannesburg. His research interests encompass diasporic narratives, transnational organized crime in literature, and the intersections of African and global cultures. His latest work, The Nigerian Mafia, Mumbai, the first in a 10-book series set across 10 countries, has been longlisted for the 2023 Chinua Achieve Prize, and winner for the 2023 Anna Prose Prize. The novel is currently being adapted for film by Indian filmmaker Ramesh Raparti. Nwelue has served as the director of the Africa Center Mexico, where he continues to explore and promote African cultural narratives within global context. So thank you very much, Onyeka, and I'll give you the floor now.
Hello? Okay. I actually prepared a very long stuff to deliver, but I think I only have 15 minutes. So I'm going to rush it up quickly. First, I must profess my delight at being here at UNAM before some of Mexico's brightest minds, vaunting a long ignored species, Afro-Mexicans. As he has introduced me, I wrote my first novel when I was 18 years old, and it was when I was living in India. So I have moved quite a lot because I consider myself as peripatetic and nomadic. I'm back in Mexico. I was here 9 years ago. So I'll go straight to addressing my topic. Could you move to the next page, please? Right. I find the theme I'm about to expound tremendously exciting. It involves a trawl through vibrant and exotic eras and scenarios. Although many here would understand my subject matter, conventions of intellectual discourse demand that I define my main terms. To plumb in our context means to get into, to reach and understand. Afro-Mexican, of course, identifies Mexicans with ancestral roots in the African continent and in the enclave known as Mexico. The culture addressed here is as defined in part by the Cambridge Dictionary, the way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group of people at a particular time. This definition of culture impels the conclusion that culture could be equated with anthropology. My presentation is focused on cultural practices indigenous to the African continent and the nation Mexico, and the fusion of those elements in Mexico. Please. The next one, please. Yeah, go. All right, go. Okay, so the year 1519 is epochal. It was the year before the death of Montezuma II, the last monarch of the Aztec Empire. The Aztec Empire held sway over the Valley of Mexico. Its capital was situated in what today is Mexico City. It was in that year, 1519, that the Spanish first shipped Africans from the African continent to Mexico to work in the agricultural and mining spheres. 90 years after Africans were first shipped to Mexico as slaves, a monumental milestone occurred in the African Odyssey in Mexico. Yanga, a heroic Afro-Mexican, yeah. No, please. Sorry. Yanga, a heroic African Mexican, repulsed the Spanish attack on the colony he led. Yanga, also known as Nyanga, was said to have been an indigene of the territory that is now Guinea-Bissau in West Africa, kidnapped and sold as a slave in Mexico. Yanga was the leader of a famous rebellion, a colony of slaves in a mountainous territory of Mexico. Yeah. Based on these, the presence, indeed the tremendous influence of African culture on Mexicans can be assumed to be tremendous. Apposite here are certain remarks of the phenomenal African-American, Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou traveled and lived in West Africa in the then newly independent Ghana of Kwame Nkrumah in the 1960s. She discovered that cultural practices which she had grown up thinking of as African-Americanisms were actually Africanisms. She recalled being on platforms with luminaries of racial struggle, including Martin Luther King, protesting that the culture of African Americans was taken from them. After living in West Africa, she realized that African Americans had retained their indigenous African culture. This was an insight she discussed poignantly upon in her 5th autobiographical volume, All God's Children Need Traveling Shoes. In quote, "The Middle Passage and the auction block had not erased us. Through the centuries of despair and dislocation, we had been creative because we faced down death by daring to hope." Later in the same book, she mused, "Now I knew my people had never completely left Africa. We had sung it in our blues, shouted it in our gospel, and danced the continent in our breakdowns. As we carried it to Philadelphia, Boston, and Birmingham, we had changed its color, modified its rhythms, yet it was Africa which rode in the bulges of our high calves, shook in our protruding behinds, and crackled in our wide open laughter." The above allusions to the thriving of African culture in the United States are also applicable to Mexico. In Uprising African Cultures in Part, I shall focus on the sublime, the art described as the most spiritual of the arts. That art is music, this concomitant of dance. I consider La Danza de los Diablos in Guerrero. Those arresting moments have a distinctly African influence. After drumming, African drumming patterns are reflected in the percussive beats of son yarocho in Veracruz. A process of breaking down might be permitted at this stage to prove the deep African origins of these elements. La Danza de los Diablos and son yarocho. If you ever find yourself in the African-Mexican communities of Costa Chica, particularly in Guerrero or Oaxaca, witnessing La Danza de los Diablos, you would feel transported to West Africa. The dancers sport devil masks, cowbells strapped to their waists, and move in hypnotic rhythmic steps while the drums control the pace of the performance. The spectacle prompts a simple question: where else do we see similar dances? In Angola, Nigeria, and Congo are traditional dances with strikingly similar features. Marks representing spirits, exaggerated bodily movements, and drumming that dictates the dancer's rhythm. There are no coincidences. Historically, many of the enslaved Africans brought to Mexico were from Bantu-speaking regions of Africa, modern-day Angola and the Congo Basin. These regions have a long tradition of masked dances, where performers embody ancestral spirits or supernatural beings. I think I almost forgot I had a projector. Yeah. It is no surprise that the contributions highlighted above are seldom acknowledged as African, but simply as Mexican. I state as a simple truth that the world teems with stories. The story of Afro-Mexicans has been one of those forgotten stories hidden behind the narrative of Mestilla, the idea that Mexican identity is solely the mix of Spanish and indigenous cultures. Mexico, however, is far more complex than is immediately discernible. But Mexico buried its African history under the discriminatory notion of Mestillas. It was not until the 2020 census that Afro-Mexicans were officially acknowledged as a distinct group. It is indeed startling that this recognition occurred only in 2020. That means that Afro-Mexicans had to wait until the year in which the world was binge watching Tiger King to finally be counted. However, To be counted does not equate to being seen. Recognition is gladdening, but what comes next? Afro-Mexicans still face economic hardship, political underrepresentation, and cultural invisibility. If these assertions seem untrue, an average Mexican in the streets should be asked to name an Afro-Mexican historical figure. The truth is, Afro-Mexicans have contributed immensely to this country's culture. The barricades that kept them in the shadows were not erected overnight and could not be demolished overnight or instantaneously. However, our determined efforts could start to break them down. History truly does not repeat itself. The lamentable history of African Mexicans, their erasure and struggle for recognition has been echoed in other parts of the world. The terminologies may have differed, but the patterns have been the same. Arrival, contribution, erasure, and the slow, painful fight to reclaim identity. Let's see Argentina and India. Please. While researching my novel, The Fifth Night at Digi Palace, I found myself drawn into another forgotten African story in India. The Siddhis, descendants of Africans brought to India over 600 years ago, have lived on the subcontinent for centuries. They have fought in armies, ruled in parts of Gujarat, and blended into the cultural fabric of the country. However, they have, like Afro-Mexicans, been marginalized, their presence acknowledged only when convenient, probably during Olympics or any other kind of engagement. Their history either ignored or rewritten. Writing The Fifth Night at Digi Palace was my mode of illuminating their story, just as we are doing today for Afro-Mexicans. I wish to convey to the paradox of their existence, a community that has been in India for over 6 centuries, but still struggled with the questions of belonging. Their music, their traditions, and even their language have survived, but their visibility in Indian society remains limited. Okay. How long do I have now?
Around 8 to 10 minutes.
Okay. The foregoing prompts a question. What does it mean to truly belong? If you have lived in a country for 500 years, if your ancestors built its roads, fought in its wars, contributed to its art and culture, how long must you wait to be accepted as part of the nation? How long must it be for history books to stop treating you as an afterthought? Afro-Mexicans, like the Siddhis, are proof that identity is not just about bloodlines or legal recognition. It is about the right to be seen, the right to claim one's place in a nation's story. The past has taught us that when people are denied their place in history, they do not disappear. They fight their way back into the narrative. Certain questions must be addressed. What can we learn from the Siddhis, from the Afro-Mexicans, from all communities that have been sidelined? To plumb Afro-Mexican cultures is not just about recognizing a group of people. It is about acknowledging a history that has been buried, a legacy that has been overlooked, and a culture that continues to thrive despite systemic erasure. The Afro-Mexican experience is woven into the fabric of Mexico, from the beats of son Yaracho to the food, the language, and the traditions that many don't even realize have African roots. To truly understand Afro-Mexican cultures, we must walk the line between history and modern reality, between recognition and invisibility, between what has been declared and what has been deliberately left out. The disregarding is simply reflective of a global trend to denigrate the African, denying a history and contributions as once not so long ago in history, even the humanity of African people, their possession of a soul was ignored. As you can see, I've never used the term Black for Africans all throughout my talk, and not even in my projection. It's also because of the colorization of Africans. First, you keep them out of the textbooks, then you define them by color, and also define them by national identity in a way that excludes them. Finally, you allow stereotypes to replace real representation. For centuries, Afro-Mexicans were not counted in the national census. The government classified them as mestizo, blending them into the general population and erasing their distinct identity. As remarked above, it was not until the 2020 census that Afro-Mexicans were officially recognized as an ethnic group after 501 years of existence in this country. However, official recognition is only a first step. True understanding requires more than checking a box on a form. It requires confronting racism, dismantling stereotypes, and amplifying Afro-Mexican voices in politics, education, and media. Despite their deep roots in Mexico, Afro-Mexicans continue to face discrimination in a country where the ideal of beauty is still largely based on lighter skin and European features. Afro-Mexicans often experience racism in ways both subtle and overt. Many Afro-Mexicans report being stopped by police more frequently, questioned about their nationality, or assumed to be foreigners in their own country. Representation in media remains minimal. When was the last time you saw an Afro-Mexican protagonist in a telenovela? It is laudable that despite these challenges, Afro-Mexican communities continue to celebrate their heritage, preserve their traditions, and fight for recognition. In this fair, grateful acknowledgement is made of the pioneering scholarship of the Mexican anthropologist and writer Gonzalo Beltran. He beamed his lens on the existence and input of marginal populations, including the Afro-Mexican. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Onyeka, for this very interesting presentation. Now let's open the floor for questions. We have around 15 minutes. Sorry, let me see. There is no one else, right? David is not here. Okay, so we are going to then continue with the discussion, and now we are going to open the floor for questions. Please, if you have any question, raise your hand, and maybe we can take, let's say, 2 or 3 questions, and we'll work like that. So any questions from the audience? I seem to be a little bit shy now, but let me start, because for me this is very, very interesting. And I'm going to start with you, Adriana. I really think literature is a very powerful tool to show what we are living nowadays, to show these cultural realities, differences, and also to have an intercultural exchange of what is happening in our countries and what is happening in other countries. So I think from talking about these 2 writers, Hopkins and Mota, I think it's a good way of also showing how, in this case, for example, Afro-descendants or Afro-Americans are also represented in the literature, because it's very interesting. Onyeka was talking about the invisibility, but this is a very way of making these problems visible, and so that people can really understand what is happening in our countries, or in this, well, the first case of this woman in Diaspora, where it's interesting that other cases have shown that when they travel, or some Africans leave the continent for a better life, they also feel trapped in a world where supposedly the conditions should be better with discrimination and should make their lives easier. So what do you think about this idea of having literature as a way of not only portraying these characters, but also like understanding and getting to know the realities that sometimes we don't see because they are actually invisible?
I think literature is also a way to show and to dialogue with other cultures, with other people, to understand their reality. But also, well, I am very interested in science fiction nowadays, because I think that in this system, in the capitalist system, they have stolen us the opportunity to imagine futures, to imagine other forms of interaction, other social reproduction. So I think that science fiction can let us imagine other futures. And reading science fiction from diaspora, from African people, but also from Caribbean, no? Like the examples that I show here, it's a way to open our eyes for other futures. It's a way also of recognizing the creativity of these people and the possibility to dialogue, to interact in different ways. Because we always assume that the people in the South, and that includes us in some ways, always need help. We need help, and they have to show us how we should develop and how we should imagine our futures. But we are imagining our futures. We are creating those realities. We are doing other forms of socialities. So I think science fiction and literature is a good way to understand other societies, other cultures, but also dialogue with them. No? Not only like something that amuses us, but something that can let us construct other worlds.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the idea of this introspection into the characters, because unfortunately, we are also in a world where social media and the news also portray the reality in a certain way, and then we even tend to then become racist with other immigrants coming to Mexico when we're also people who migrate to many other countries. But I think like going into literature, going into the character's mind, it's really a very good opportunity for people to also start making these connections and interactions with people who are also in diaspora or migrating for many different reasons. Thank you, Adriana. Onyeka, I think it's very interesting what you discuss, and especially the idea of Mexico only recognizing to a certain extent Afro-descendants in our country. And after 500 years, it's only 2020 when they started actually. I think it was 2018 when it was approved in the legislation that the official recognition for Afro-descendants in our country. But I agree with what you say, and this is still there is still a lot of work to do. So it's the idea of invisibility. I think it also comes from what we experienced in the modern Mexico in at the beginning of the 20th century, when the Mexican government wanted to make this cosmic nation, and we were only one nation and only one population, and that actually helped to eradicate and invisibilize Afro-descendants in our country. So I think it's an important step, but there is still a lot to do. And I really like, I mean, not only your profile, like very wide profile, you are also a jazz musician and writer and filmmaker. So I would like to know, how do you think all these cultural approaches can also help to make them visible again? I mean, you spoke about obviously these different types of dancing in the Caribbean, but I think also music, dance, and the pop folklore, it's an important tool to make these Afro-descendants visible again. So what do you think about that?
Very interesting. I wasn't going to blow my trumpet, but I have to. Maybe 2 weeks ago, we finished shooting a film called Los Perros de Mexico. Mm-hmm. And it's a film that is shot across different countries, but the heart of the story is Mexico. So it has Mexican actors in it. We have Colombian actors, we have Ecuadorian actors, and also Nigerian actors who speak Spanish. So it's made in Spanglish. And the idea was to say, do we have any collaboration between Africans and Mexicans in a film? Not yet. So this will be the first. hopefully. I've also done a song with the same title. I did a song, shot a music video with a Marathi band, and it's my way of contributing to the narrative that I'm interested in first, because they always say that you have to lead by example. So I want to start, and then if people find it interesting, then they might want to do more. And this is what I've been doing for a long time, because even the first book that I wrote is set in India and is about an Indian family, an Indian woman, sorry, an Indian man married to a Nigerian woman. And I've been doing that for a long time. I also have a book set in Japan and Ghana. I also have a book set in Mexico, written in Spanglish. I also have another one set in Pachuca. So I'm doing my own best, and I hope it will be recognized. And we also organize the Puebla International Literary Festival in Puebla. So we might also bring it to Mexico City. The idea is to, for me, to always intermarry ideas. Yeah, and this is my own contribution, and I think other Mexicans should collaborate with us on that, on other things like music. The idea of jazz music, which is very Afrocentric, and also you can find a lot of similarities between bachata and the rest of them with African music. A lot of Mexican styles of music have similarities with what we play in Nigeria, and we have different names for them.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, you were also talking about the history books and the identity that Afro-descendants have the right to be seen. And I agree that, I mean, obviously history books should include that, it's part of our history and it's part of the Afro-descendants history as well. So it's part of, of our own shared history. I lived in South Africa for close to 6 years, and it was very intriguing teaching Spanish, also language and culture and literature. But it was also very interesting to detach from this context of teaching Spanish in this immersion in Mexico, and also to try to understand what are the links, what are the connections that bring Mexican Latin Americans with African South Africans, for example, no? Like if we are going to teach Spanish, that also should be included, like all the folklore, like as you say, the heritage of music, the heritage of beliefs, especially in the Caribbean, like religious beliefs. All that is part of our culture, is part of our language, and it's also something that we should also include in teaching materials when we teach Spanish and culture. So the reivindication of Afro-descendants has to come from different points and not only from history books. I think it's one part of it, but then obviously all what you are doing, I think it contributes greatly to bringing these ties and connections together.
Sorry, let me just 1 minute. I think we share a lot in common in many ways, even in religion, Santeria, voodoo, and so many things, and they can be amplified through literature, through films, through music. So it's not only one channel that can be done, but I totally agree with you. There are so many ways to do that.
Yeah. No, the similarities are actually quite interesting. Also learning in South Africa about the sangomas.
Sangomas, that's
that we have with the chamans here. It's basically the same. It's basically the same concept. I don't know if there is any influx of that here, but of the sangomas here, traditional healers.
They are here.
It's obviously there are so many connecting points that we have to start bringing up to make this connection between our continents. Sorry, I'm taking the floor for a little bit too long. Are there any other questions or comments from our audience? Yes.
Maybe just a little comment as well. I think I totally agree with you that literature and arts and all this historical connection with these cultural practices with traditional African music here in America, in the Caribbean, more specifically, are becoming more important in the creation of scholarly work as well, as sources, as new kind of sources to create academic and scholarly work that usually historically these sources are ignored. And we usually just take into consideration academic sources, and most of time Eurocentric and American sources. So I think it's imperative now to introduce this, all these arts and art studies, cultural studies contribute to rewrite history from another perspective. No, I always tell my students, and here is there's one student from my classes at the faculty, that when we study, for example, the French Revolution that happened in 1789, we should also study the Haitian Revolution that happened just 2 years with difference, and all the connections between these two processes, instead of only studying the French Revolution or seeing Haitian Revolution as a peripheral event in history. So I think it's crucial to delve into these kind of sources to be able to create new perspectives of history and rewrite it ultimately.
Yes. Do you have any final concluding remarks, or are we good at the moment? Thank you again for being here, for your wonderful presentations. And this is then the end of our third panel at the colloquium. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you.